What's up, Guan fam? Josh here back in the dojo. Welcome to the Move by the Message podcast. If this is your first time here, don't forget to like and subscribe, especially if you leave here with something tangible and valuable that you can apply to your life today to make it just a little bit better. Today's message is coming from OG Anthony Robbins, Tony Robbins, Big Tone, Big Anthony, one of the OGs in the game and arguably the GOAT. I follow tons of speakers, been doing it for maybe 3 or so decades now. But Tony Robbins has always been, top two, top three of all time, at least in my personal opinion, as the greatest thought leaders, speakers, somebody that can really use his words of communication to evoke change. Tony Robbins is definitely top one, top two, top three. Today we're going to unpack his stance about state, what state is, how you get into state, and the differences between resources and resourcefulness. And once you learn these things, we'll also give you some techniques because I like people to leave with tangible things. I love listening to motivational material, whether it's from, a superstar, somebody that's really well known, or just a barber, right? Or an Uber driver, something like that. But I think sometimes people need more. They don't just need words, even though words are powerful. I feel like people need tangible activity. People need homework, right? People need action as opposed to just thoughts, right? Because once you apply action, once you get into your body, or once you put pen to paper, or take the first step, or film your first video, whatever that thing is, then you have a higher chance of success and actually moving the needle in your life. So that's what we'll get into today. So I got put on to Tony Robbins years ago. I think since I was, 13, 12, 13, or 14. And I was always a fan of the different messages he has. His audio books were, or they were programs at the time, but, Get the Edge, Personal Power. You had a few of them joints, right? And you had to actually buy the CD, right? The 12-pack CD, however many came in the program. And I think you got a workbook or something like that. But he's been doing it since Gunthy Rinker. Throughout the years, he's had different messages, right? One of the main things that stuck out to me, right, and that I've always remembered, and I remember downloading that mentally as a kid, like this is one of his most prominent messages, was this concept of state, changing your state, and how your state affects everything you do in life. It affects your filter, it affects how you see things, it affects how things affect you. And there's different things that we do as humans, some positive, some negative, to change our state. And if I had to simplify what I think a state is, I would just say it's how you feel at the time, at the moment. Are you excited? Are you sad? Are you depressed? Are you fearful? Are you angry? Are you full of joy? Anything like that. It's just an emotion, an emotional state that you're in at a particular time. And for the most part, we don't necessarily choose when we flow in and out of these states, and especially more perceivably positive states, right? Negative states, I think we choose those more often than we choose positive states. And how do we do that? We do that by drinking. We do that by smoking some weed, doing a little coke, whatever your vice is, right? Having sex, watching TV, hanging around friends. Not that those things are like outright negative, but I think it's the more positive states that we want to get into that basically we choose like the easier vehicle. So we all want to feel better about ourselves, right? So we do certain things, we use certain vehicles to change our state. Sometimes we want to feel more relaxed because we're thinking about the stress of the day, stress of the relationship, financial issues, health issues. So we take certain vehicles and we ride those vehicles to a different state. I don't think any of these are necessarily good or bad. They're just a vehicle. But just like with any vehicle or any vice, we can use it or we can abuse it. We can use it or it can use us. But again, we're already every day, I think every moment throughout the day, trying to be in a balanced state. So in one of Tony's interviews, he was breaking down to the interviewer how just sitting up straight, right? I think they called it the Superman stance, putting your hands on your hips, lifting your chin, having like going from like a narrow stance, like a normal stance, to like a wide stance, how that biologically boosts testosterone, it boosts serotonin, dopamine, and all kinds of neurological things going on inside of us just by changing the way you're standing, which is a state change. And he also breaks down how no matter what vehicle we choose as humans, for the most part, none of us are choosing these vehicles for negative reasons. Now, again, some vehicles are better than others, right? Exercise, working out, is a better vehicle to boost dopamine, serotonin, and feel a sense of stress relief and a sense of well-being. That's a better tool in the long run, short and long run, than drinking or cocaine or some other destructive vehicle, right? It's a better vehicle and a more sustainable vehicle. Meditation is another example. Meditation is a better vehicle for you to feel stress relief or sort of just bring down your cortisol, your stress levels. So now to bring this thing home, it's vital for us to not leave our states up to chance. We shouldn't just ebb and flow with our states depending on like the day or what somebody said to you. We need to be in control of how we feel because there's power in that control. If you feel good today because the sun is out, but for the rest of the week it's raining, and you don't necessarily feel as jazzed, which is fine, you still want to have reliable tools and vehicles that you can go to get you back in the state, or at least closer to like an optimal state. So that's what Tony Robbins talks about. He talks about state, he talks about different vehicles that people use to get in and out of certain states, and how training your mind and your body through these techniques we're about to go over can allow you to sort of have that bullet in the chamber when needed. So then he also talks about resources versus resourcefulness. Now, we all come from different walks of life. Some of us are more well off. Some of us are just okay. And some of us are like really could use some help. But in each walk of life, you see people that succeed, people that excel, and you see people that fail. And he also talked about a stat that said, in more cases than you would think, people that have everything handed to them, like born into wealth, and this is not to say, this is not to have a pity party for people who are born into wealth, but sometimes they don't get to develop that muscle of resourcefulness, even though they have all the resources, the wealth, the house, security blankets, like the car, the vehicle, the social status. They're okay, but they never have a chance to build the muscle of resourcefulness. But then you'll take somebody on the opposite end of the spectrum who has nothing, but because they have nothing, they don't have a lot of resources. They made them develop the muscle of resourcefulness, right? They start to search, they start to open their minds, and they start to search for different avenues and tools and things that people use. Even if it's not a perfect plan, they start to use anything that they can use to help themselves out. Because as Tony Robbins explains it, they are hungry, right? And hunger is really how you move the needle in your life. Conor McGregor, for example. Conor McGregor, one of my favorite fighters, he didn't necessarily grow up with a lot of opportunity, a lot of resources, stuff like that, right? I followed this story like a little bit. So he was hungry at one point in his life, and it drove him to this greatness to become this outstanding fighter. His trash talking and his showmanship was like top notch, right? He's still a showman, and it was because he was hungry, right? He had goals. He wanted to take care of his family. He wanted to prove himself in the jungle, so to speak, that he can be the best. And when he was hungry, before he had all the money, he was one of the greatest. I think he was one of the greatest of all time, at least one of my favorites, right? I don't know all the UFC lineage, but he was one of my favorites. But then after he got his big paydays, and I think his biggest payday, if I'm not mistaken, was the Floyd Mayweather fight, some would argue that he lost his mojo. He lost his hunger, right? Because he doesn't have to go into the gym, train 2, 3 times a day, go to fight camps, get his face beat in, spar all the time, get himself hurt, right? For money anymore. He has the resources. He has them, right? So that muscle that he once used and developed, he doesn't have to use that anymore. That hunger isn't exactly the same. And I think that's a good metaphor for some people in life. So it's not a matter of not having resources. It really comes down to your resourcefulness. And if you feel like you don't have a lot of resources, one, I would say look around you, right? And take inventory. Really see what's available to you, right? Really see who's in your life, right? As far as close relationships or relationships that you could develop, what income streams are available to you? Is it a job? And if it's not a job, another one of my favorite speakers, he says, if you can't find a job, make a job. Do you have access to a computer, whether a personal computer or some library or something like that? And can you find someone that needs graphic design services or photography, right? Do you have a phone, a smartphone? Can you start to take pictures for brands, right? These are just two random examples, but before you decide that there aren't any resources, take inventory on people, places, opportunities, who needs what. As far as making money, if you can add value to a business or a brand, they'll pay you for these things. So take inventory on what's available, who is available. And even if you don't feel like there's a lot of resources, develop the resourcefulness to take this lemon and turn it into lemonade. You understand what I'm saying? to make something out of this thing. No matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult the road, look at this as an opportunity. Look at this as a training camp, same way fighters do. This is you in training camp, and when you're on the other side or the tail end of this difficult chapter, you'll be a lean, mean fighting machine. You'll be somebody that is resourceful. And in addition to being resourceful, you now have more resources that you can draw on. And so to wrap this thing up, here are a few things that Tony Robbins says that he does to ensure that he can get in state, because you can't rely on the ebbs and flows of emotion or of motivation. You want to make sure you can get in state so that you can perform and see these resources, right? As bountiful or as limited as they may be, you can find these resources and become resourceful. So he says he does a 10-minute process in the morning. He said he doesn't leave it up to chance, that emotion or that state, he doesn't leave it up to chance. And just like with anything, if you don't use it, you lose it. Because in that same interview, he was talking about how some people will come back to him, a year, a couple of years later and say, Tony, your techniques worked, all right? They worked really well, changed my life, but it doesn't work anymore. Something like that, something he was saying, to where like it worked for a while, but like it just doesn't work anymore. And he would ask him like, are you still using the techniques? And they will say no. And they giggled and chuckled and stuff like that. But he was basically saying that, bruh, if you if you don't use the techniques, right, you lose it. Same thing with exercise. What happens if you exercise for 2 weeks, right, and then you don't exercise for 2 years? Like, will you still be in shape because you put 2 weeks in? Not at all. So just like with most things, there's maintenance, right? So even though you learn these techniques, knowing them is not enough to get you the results that you want. It's not enough to move the needle. You have to apply these techniques on a regular basis. So you develop rituals throughout your day, right? Throughout your week and throughout your month that you can draw on and rely on to keep you in these states so that you build that resourcefulness muscle. So he says he has a 10-minute process where he gets up in the morning. The first thing he does, I think he says he takes 3 or so minutes to just be grateful, right? To show gratitude. He says that you can't be grateful and fearful at the same time. You can't be grateful and depressed at the same time, right? I guess it's almost similar, like you can't keep your eyes open and sneeze, I think. I don't know if that's a myth or not, but you can't do both at the same time. You can only do one or the other. So if you train your mind muscle, right, and your biology, because remember, we're not just talking about sitting down thinking, because exercise is like a huge component with all this, right? But you stand up, you sit up straight, right? And I always recommend you do some exercise before you go into this, because that's going to put you in a more powerful state. It's one thing to try to outthink everything, which I talked about in the other video of mine. It's one thing to try to use your psyche to outthink depression or outthink fear and all that. It's another thing to use your biochemistry, to use your body, right? So eating well, meditating, exercise. So I always recommend get the heart rate up before you go into this technique. This is nothing that Tony said, right? Which I know he agrees, but he takes 3 or so minutes to go into a state of gratitude, being thankful for his life, being thankful for his ability to see, the career that he has, right, the finances that he has. He becomes extremely grateful, so that those voices of fear, which you also mentioned, like he has that too. He doesn't always feel jazzed, right? But he doesn't allow himself to stay in state. I think he said he has a 90-second rule where he'll allow himself to feel whatever emotion, fear, anger, disgust, anxiety, for 90 seconds. And then he goes into his ritual, and that state has to go. That emotion has to go. It can't supersede the state that he needs to be in at that moment. So after you do whatever you want to do to get the heart rate up, some jumping jacks, some push-ups, some sit-ups, if you got dumbbells or a medicine ball, just move that thing for about 2 or 3 minutes, right? Then go into, and again, this is sort of like a combination of what Tony says he does, and then what I'm suggesting you do. Then you go into the 3 or so minutes of gratitude, and you really feel more grateful, right? And I would say overdo it too, meaning like instead of just enjoying the fact that you can see or hear, really pump it up, right? Really like overdo it and exaggerate how great it is to be able to see, right? How great it is that you can hear me, right? How great it is that you can walk over to the TV, turn it on, turn it off. The fact that your limbs are working properly, right? Your organs and different things are working properly. Really be grateful for that. And if any of these things are compromised on you, any of the things I mentioned, or just anything in your life is compromised, be grateful for what you do have, right? So that's the first thing he does. The second thing he does is he thinks about his family and his friends, so like his close network, how grateful he is for them. Right? I don't think he said prayer. I don't think he used the word prayer, but basically, he's grateful for them, and he says some sort of sends like good vibes their way, because that's like the real wealth in life, the relationships that you develop, the family, the friends. I think having close relationships is like the pinnacle of happiness, right? It's like the happiest we can be is when we share life and share experiences with the ones closest to us. So it takes 3 or so minutes to be grateful and show gratitude for his family and friends. And then the last 3 or so minutes, he thinks about all the things that he wants to accomplish, whether that day, that month, or like that year. And he shows tons of thankfulness and gratitude for the accomplishment of those things, no matter how big or small the goal. He's super grateful and thankful for the accomplishment of these things ahead of time. Now, again, these aren't things he already accomplished. These are things that he wants to accomplish. And he says once he does these things, and I'm sure he does other things, I'm sure his diet is on point. I'm sure he's getting enough sleep, because, sometimes things don't work on their own. They work better in tandem with like other things. Again, getting enough sleep, eating the right foods, because this affects your biochemistry. You may try these techniques, but if you're dead tired because you never go to sleep on time, it may not work it may not be as effective. So in closing, this is the tangible homework that I want you to take away with you from this video. Get more sleep, even if you just go to bed a half hour earlier for the next couple of months, right? Until you get in about that 6, 7, or 8 hours a night. If that's possible, get more sleep. If you have to take naps throughout the day, get more sleep, because that affects everything. Make sure you eat well, right? Make sure you're eating high quality foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and healthy fats. Make sure you're getting those into your diet. I'm not saying your diet has to be perfect every day, but at least 4 times a week, make sure you focus on clean eating, right? Plenty of fruits, plenty of vegetables, nuts, seeds, multivitamins, right? Different superfoods, healthy shakes. Clean up your diet, because that affects your biochemistry, which ultimately affects your nervous system, which affects the way you feel, right? Meditate. And I don't care what kind of meditation you're doing, whether it's transcendental, whether it's breath work, sit down and work. I think it's the I don't know if the sympathetic nervous system or the parasympathetic nervous system, but which is different from exercise. Meditation affects a different part of your mind and your body. And once you start to incorporate these web of techniques with the sleep, the meditation, the proper diet, you really start to build a powerful tool set that you can use to change your state. And then exercise. Make sure you exercise, whether it's daily or almost daily, or even if you just use it before you do the techniques that Tony Robbins suggested, which I'll go over in a second. Make sure you exercise, because I think exercise is just the key. It's the fountain of youth. It keeps you strong. It keeps you feeling good. It keeps the serotonin and dopamine floating throughout the mind and the body to help you stay in the peak state. So, in addition to what Tony said, do these things: the proper sleep, proper diet, meditation, and the exercise, and then take the 9 or 10 minutes or so, 3 minutes of gratitude, like real gratitude, 3 minutes for the family and friends, right? And being grateful for them. And then 3 minutes to set your goal and set your intentions for the day. And once you weave these techniques together, these actionable steps, I can almost guarantee you it will at least move the needle in your life, right? You can close a chapter of depression, close a chapter of feeling good one day, feeling bad the next day, and at least go into the next chapter of stability, emotional stability, a stable state that you can rely on to move the needle in your life. And it won't just come because it's sunny one day, and it won't just leave because it's rainy the next. These are ancient tools and new tools, contemporary tools that you can really use and change the state of your body, change the state of your mind, and change the state of your life. Again, if you found this helpful, go ahead and like and subscribe, share this video out, share this with someone who needs this kind of information. As always, y'all, ABC, always be creating, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.